We're going to take it in order, so from groups 1 to 5. Amy, the presentations are already on the laptop. And give it to me and I will put it on the laptop before we start. So if we can start with group 1, please. Two things. Firstly, presentations, 20 minutes. When you've got 5 minutes left, from Zilly will hold up a piece of paper that says 5 minutes left. And then she has another one for when there's 1 minute left, just so you know your timing. And then after there'll be 5 minutes of questions. So if anyone has any questions for the presenter, that will be
you don't have to worry about me. No, I'm worried about you. Yeah, we'll keep it short and simple the way you like it. Yeah. So you're looking through the history and you better condense it. Just give me like the basics of the history. Like, yeah, let's see what happens. Here's over.
I'm streaming.
Yeah.
Don't take credit, but I gave you that. I did this now.
Just stand on that side.
Speak concisely.
You're all standing here in front of me.
It's not gonna make it. Sorry? You must stand on the camera, right? Stand on the side. Yeah.
G'day guys, we are group 1 and we'll be speaking about gender-based violence, more so the psychological and economical aspects of different types of gender-based violence this afternoon. So gender-based violence goes beyond the physical and sexual that most people do know about. Over the past few days, we've gone into a lot of that area, and so we won't spend too much time focusing on that because we want to take that time to speak about the 3 case studies that we want to look at, just to give you some more information and give you our recommendations that we like to see going forward for the different Commonwealth countries. So going forward next, we will be speaking about acid throwing, and I'll turn over to my colleagues who will be addressing that.
Right. So due to the shortage of time, etc., for several reasons, we decided we're going to be talking about 3 main cases, and through that we're going to show some gender-based violence issues that we think are kind of highlighting the world today. So first of all is the ones we're going to be talking about is the acid throwing. So face melters, this is a term used in the UK actually for the stuff that is used to throw the acid that is thrown. Vitriolage is the scientific name for that, and acid throwing is generally colloquially what we know it as. What's the concept? I think I talked a little bit about it yesterday, in case you remember it. If not, essentially you're throwing concentrated acid on someone else, and the idea is to permanently disfigure them. It can be a lot of reasons for why you're doing it, can consist of a lot of reasons which we'll talk about. Is it a gender crime though? All the agencies that have investigated it throughout have declared that it is a gender crime where women are disproportionately affected more. What are the effects? Like I talked about, it's permanent disfigurement, blindness, and scarring. The pictures that we wanted to show were actually so triggering, we decided not to put them in the presentation, but you can take a look. They bring with them, this crime brings with it a big psychological effect and economic effect for sure. The statistics from South Asia will tell you that this is most common in India and Bangladesh as of now. The statistics for Pakistan simply do not exist. Some other countries have different versions of it. For example, in Jamaica, a lot of times women are throwing acid on other women for the reasons stated above. Again, we'll talk a bit about the reasons as we go on. So the motivators in South Asia, you can take a quick look over here. Parth will be discussing a little bit more about the individual motivators as we go on. An interesting thing that came up in yesterday's conversation was actually acid throwing in the UK. So when we talked about that, that was interesting to notice because that was the first time I realized, oh, it's happening outside as well. And when we looked at that, the UK is very different though. The motivators for UK are very different, which is why I'm just discussing it right here. According to the report that was established, the suspect was male 74% of the times, just 6% were Asian. And out of this 15 years, only one case of this being motivated by honor arise, which is the South Asian context. And now a common thing in the UK is a lot of times gangs are using it to hurt someone, to rob them of their belongings. Next, please. Wait, sorry guys, it's just a little stuck.
We do apologize for the technical inconveniences.
I'm sure our time has been stopped.
Right, so as I was talking about, I talked about the UK. The only last thing I want to talk about is, so why is it such a thing, so prevalent? One of the big problems, one of the greatest barriers in this crime still being out there is that it's not prohibitive to carry the agent used. So it's just acid which you can which you can use to clean your toilets, etc. It's not illegal to carry it, which is one of the big problems, and contributes to it being very prevalent. So I think Parth will take over now and talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so coming to the issue of acid attack, first we decided we'll take a better look at India. If you see, the official report says there are about 300 cases per year, but a lot of NGOs who actually do ground level work on these issues say that they're close to about 1,000 cases annually. There's a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court, which is the apex court of our country, in the case of Lakshmi Agarwal versus the Union of India, in which it laid down guidelines to buy acid for commercial purposes. That required that the purchaser needed to show government ID, that they needed to disclose the purpose of buying that asset, and most importantly, all the retail stores had to give all this data to the nearest police station every 3 days. However, as the checks carried out by these NGOs tell us, that none of these guidelines were actually followed. Most importantly, the Supreme Court also directed different state governments to make proper guidelines regarding the regulation as well, but none of these guidelines ever saw the light of day. More importantly, we looked at a documentary which said that the compensation sums which were promised by the state governments never reached the victims, and if they did, they probably reached maybe 8 to 10 years later, and by then I think they lose their credibility to a very large extent. Many motivators, as my partner Heather mentioned, are dowry, family disputes, land property disputes. There are a lot of times in the interviews when the victim said that, oh, they had a marital discord, the husband got angry and left the house, the wife moved to her parents' house, and in the morning the husband came and threw acid on her. And most of these incidents follow the same tangents. As you see, we found some statistics, 2016-17, there are only 25 convictions out of the 850 cases registered. And these would be, we need to understand that 850 cases were registered, the official numbers, the unofficial numbers would probably be much larger. There are very few incidences which actually even go to court considering the condition of Indian courts. Successful efforts. So we looked at Bangladesh as a case study. The fascinating thing is only 8 cases were there in Bangladesh in 2019 as compared to about 500 cases throughout 2015, 16 and 14. We looked at what they used, the strategies they used, officials and experts say, declining rate due to a coordinated effort of social, legal, and administrative campaigns. Governments and local charities have tried to remove stigma. They have promoted the process of rehabilitation of the victims into the normal society, proper regulation, proper implementation of the laws enacted. They have very high conviction rates for acid attack cases, which is a huge contrast from India. And there's a regulation of the sale and purchase. You can go through these points. Furthermore, suggestions. Now, I think this is the essence. Frankly, first thing we need to push states to fulfill their obligations to the signed treaties, the international treaties. There's one which almost all South Asian countries have signed, the CEDAW, you can see the full form. And it says, there's a clause which says they need to protect women's rights, but that's not been followed. The domestic laws which are made are sometimes not strict enough, or even if they are strict enough, they are not followed. One very practical example we found was in UK there's a voluntary code for all retailers of acid, for such acid and highly corrosive substances, that they will not sell this acid to people below the age of 18. But again, it's a voluntary code, it's not enforceable by law. Another observation we found was a knife attack in UK is attempted murder, but throwing acid is only grievous bodily harm. And the penalty or the burden of proof in both the offences is very different. And that is, there's a straight-up reform that changed the legislation, changed the recognition of these offences. As seen in Bangladesh, civil society movements to raise awareness and reduce stigma have been highly effective, and we need them. So we need state bodies to promote such groups in carrying out these campaigns. Lastly, education programs to make children more sensitized and respectful to gender differences. At the end of the day, it is a form of gender inequality, and we believe if we include certain programs at the school level to help the children understand gender differences and gender, I won't say inequalities, but again, the genders are different, and to respect that difference, I think that would be helpful and help mitigate such offences in the future. Also, we wanted to show one thing. So this is how we wanted to show this slide. This is what the acid attack victims are gaining. They're gaining space in the public sphere. Saving Face is a documentary of acid attack victims in Pakistan. And Chapak was a movie which came in 10 January 2020 in India. It was a very controversial topic. Whether the movie did justice or not, that's a separate thing. But they are gaining space. It is a very up-and-coming movement here. Thank you.
The second part of our presentation will be looking at child marriages, the psychological and economic aspect of gender abuse. So what we decided to first put up is the statistics of it. You'll find that 12 million girls in Africa are forced to be into these marriages before they turn 18. A predicted 140 million will actually be forced to get into marriages before the age of 18 in the next 10 years if we do not make any change in it. 1 in 5 girls are married before reaching 18, and numbers are double in the least developed countries, where 40% of the girls are married before 18 and 12% are at 15. And then the one thing that is actually shocking about this whole thing is that even though there are laws that prevent the kids, in some countries there are laws that prevent the kids to not get into marriage before the age of 18, you find that the parents are the ones that consent to these marriages happening, so the child is left without any rights, so to speak. Firstly, we're going to look at the psychological effects on the parental side of things, because you find that as much as we can say that the parents are wrong for agreeing to this, but there are certain factors that drive them into performing these acts. You find that these acts are usually done in poverty-stricken places, whereby the parents feel that they need to fulfill a monetary obligation. They're trying to increase their stance in the community so that they can get money from the dowry of these little girls. And then you find that most of the time these parents have been through this, so it's something that's been programmed within them that this is how it should be done, this is how a woman should actually live, and this is what these girls were actually born to do. They were born in order for them to actually stand up for the family in society, and actually they have to do this because it's part of their set traditions or their set culture. Then the driving force into this is it's a social acceptance thing where everyone has a need to feel or to want to be accepted. So then these people are driven by that force, where you find that in a certain area where everyone is practicing this, if you do not practice it yourself, then you are at a risk of being shunned. So then it's a psychological thing whereby you will have to do it if you want to stay into that community. And then the thing is, the psychological damage in this society is so big that they're easily manipulated by the system itself. And therefore it makes it so hard to actually gain a change into it. And then
so in terms of the psychological effect on the child, as kids we are taught to obey our parents, and that is what we're supposed to do, respectful and going forward. So when it is that children are put into this situation, for them to object and to say no, it's a big no-no. It's not within their culture or within themselves to say no to their parents, especially with something like this. And understanding that if I get married now, it's going to take my family out of poverty somehow, or it's going to put them in a better situation. And so because of that obligation, the pressure to continue that trend is there for these kids. And growing up, these girls are taught that their only job is to be born, listen to their parents, reproduce, and then when they get married off, is to listen to their next husband or whatever the case is. And that continues. And so the cycle continues. There's no way for them to break it, and because of that, it just continues. It goes on to their kids who comes next. My colleague mentioned that earlier, and it's an honor for some of them. They recognize it as an honor to be chosen depending on where they are or the way it's culturally done. But even in some cases, depending on the country, so in the Caribbean, a lot of people don't hear about, child marriage is happening, but it does happen. And while it's not spoken about a lot, it is in the community, and no one says anything about it because, that's how it's supposed to be. And so socializing, the communities themselves recognize this, and this allows the children to just accept it as a norm. So in terms of solutions, a lot of countries have signed on to different treaties and stuff, and that is something that I wish that more countries would enforce. So at the bottom of the slide down there, I pointed out two that have two treaties that we've signed on to, like a lot of countries. And something that was established a few years ago, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but it's called International Day of the Girl Child. And that is a day dedicated to empowering girls and letting them know about their rights themselves and who they can aspire to be. And that's something that I think that should be pushed more, and let kids know this is happening, this is a day for you to celebrate who you are. So that's a day itself, but also it's put in programs within the schools to educate these kids, to let them know that this is not the only option for you. If this does happen, and they do know that it's going to happen, they can come and speak to a teacher or something, because it's wrong. They don't have to simply listen to mom and dad and get married, but they know that there's a support system out there. And apart from that, it's, as Janine said on day one, it's working with the community organizations that are already in place. So the governments, I believe, should should give more funds or give more support, whatever resource it is, because NGOs and organizations such as those, they can only do so much. They're always lacking resources, and if it is that they had more support from governments, I know that they could do a lot more work, and I believe that if our governments out there did that, we would definitely see a change, especially in countries and communities where this is prevalent.
Hello everyone, I'll be taking you through FGM, that is female genital mutilation, which is a common practice within most parts of Africa, especially Uganda. We have it practiced in Kenya, we have it practiced in Asia and some parts of Middle East. FGM itself is the partial removal of the genitalia by traditional cutters using rudimentary tools, for example, razor blades, knives, according to their traditional setting. However, the UN reports that about 200 million girls have undergone through this and under the ages of 15 years. The agenda behind this is it is to reduce sexual feelings of girl child or women or men. It is also a norm that they believe that these women who have not undergone through FGM are not allowed to, they are not allowed to handle food, handle water, and the rest. Our questions are, how far have you gone while enforcing law on FGM? 2, is the FGM practice sustainable towards the livelihoods of communities practicing it? And we went on with question 2, which we say it is no.
So there's a lot of effects with FGM that are all listed here. Short-term effects include bleeding, bacterial infections. It does really damage the genital tissue. But more than this, it has quite impactful long-term effects. And it can really affect fertility in women, increases the risk of newborn deaths, higher rate of childbirth complications. So our suggested solutions to FGM, we suggest 2 solutions. The first is a sexual education program to be implemented in the country where FGM takes place. So the government, we think, should support NGOs which already are trying to implement these programs. So these programs would explain the short and long-term implications, but we also want to try and liberate female sexual pleasure and try and reduce the stigma around sexual pleasure for females as well. So this public awareness can change perceptions and alert people to the dangers. For example, in Uganda, the Education Ministry has assigned gender studies as a course, so we feel like this knowledge could really help people understand more. Obviously, it's difficult to change the minds of older generations who will defend the practices rooted in the culture, but we have to start with the next generation. So that's where our suggestion for education programs comes from.
Law enforcement against FGM is the continued solutions we are trying to address such a challenge. For example, according to the jurisdiction of Uganda, the bill was assented into law of 7 years. Whoever is got as a proprietor of this unpopular social practice. But however, it is just a challenge that the law exists, but there is no enforcement by the institutions who have capacity to do it, like the Uganda police. 2, we need also to go on with the statistics to really survey that how many people have been arrested as suspects or culprits of the circumstance, and have them used as a reference and draws lessons to others to understand that it is really a bad practice. There is also a call for Commonwealth countries to ban the FGM as a wrong practice.
And to conclude into all of this is that we have to look beyond, with all these things that are happening to human beings, it's human being on human being crime, and because of this, it's a psychological matter, it's a matter of mental health. All these people that are doing these things, you find that there's something wrong with them at the core. So I believe that as a people, we need to start building healthy people, healthy-minded people, people that don't see a need into hurting others, people that don't have to prove a point by inflicting pain onto the next person. Thank you.
Questions?
Is there provision for us? Yeah, my question is about FGM that you talk about. I think last year, the wife of the Prime Minister of Sierra Leone was caught to be saying there is no harm in FGM. So looking at the way people of high authority are endorsing it, saying that people are telling their people that there is no harm in it. Based on that, what policy can you propose, or how can you propose a policy that can accommodate these challenges, and what do you propose as a solution?
Well, I believe that with these things, it usually happens in poverty-stricken places. So they're saying that because they know that the people won't really have a way to fight back. So if we, as the people, actually solidify and we actually fight against them, then we'd be able to make a change into it. Because at this point, this is a high-powered woman saying that there's actually no harm, because she probably doesn't even experience it. It doesn't affect her like it does the other people. So all the people that are affected by it, if they were to come together and actually make a stand and say, actually this is harmful, this is making an impact into us, then maybe they'd be able to take them seriously. Because right now, all the people fighting these things, you find that they're underground. They don't want to come up into the surface for the world to see. And while we're doing that, unfortunately, a change will not be made. Because the people that are suffering in silence and are not brave enough to do the fighting will still stay quiet, because it's only an underground movement.
Any other?
It's just, it's a kind of response. I was really interested to see that in your general frame of gender-based violence, that men appear also not only as perpetrators but occasionally as victims. And that's something really to think about, because we had a discussion yesterday about, is this, are we talking only about women and children as victims?
I think that's something important for us all to remember and understand, that it's gender-based violence. We are not speaking against violence against women. So gender-based violence speaks to the genders itself, and violence against women will be something under that area. But something happened to you because of your gender. This has happened to you because of that, and that's what a lot of people don't understand or recognize. And while there are a lot of international treaties and conventions that do speak mainly about women and girls, this is because they are disproportionately disadvantaged in our society in different ways. But there are conventions and treaties that speak about men and the issues that do happen to them. So, yes, we have
I'll just say, one of the measures that you mentioned was introducing educational programs. Given that it's parents that decide whether to kind of conduct the FGM and other practices, do you think that parents would be open to those kind of educational programs in the first place? And in that case, what stage do you feel those educational programs should be actually implemented at? Because otherwise children don't have the option to opt into that education.
I mean, for me, in the educational program, in a sense, you do science in school, and you learn about the body, and it's adding that extra part where it's adding that extra part that tells you that it's okay to feel pleasure as a woman. I mean, these things aren't taught in schools, and you just learn the basics. So you learn the anatomy, you learn this, you learn that. And I think if they increase the knowledge is given to students, it's given to girls, it's given to boys about these different things, that would make a difference. So while it is that it's the parents that make these decisions, at the end of the day, when I come home and my mom is like, oh, you're gonna get this done to you, and I'm gonna understand because I learned about this, and that it's not right, because I am allowed to feel this way. I can do this, and I don't need this to happen to me. And this is where, with my knowledge, I can go to the right authority, I can go to my teacher, I can find out where I can go to get support to ensure that that doesn't happen to me. And unfortunately, we are out of time for questions, but if you do have anything else, at a later time when you're free to ask any questions if you have any.
But on your point, educational programs, I completely understand what you're saying. You also need educational program for the grown-ups in such cases.
Yes.
So those do need to be implemented, yeah. Thank you.
Guys, before you sit down, we're just going to give you your certificates now, so that we can say, well done, you've done your bit now, there's still more of the programme, but we thought we'd give you a presentation, present the certificates now, so that we can have a group photo for all of that.
Yeah.
So, brilliant student volunteers going to give them out to you, and then we'll take a group photo at the end.
Who do you have for
Emmanuel.
Each must get, everybody must
Yeah,
get.
we'll get one photo.
Sadie. Kyla. Heda. Park.
Too many cameras.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. One second. Yeah.
It's already in, I didn't take it out. I got it.
Okay. Hi. Put the camera.